right. So, welcome everybody. Really excited to talk about how to leverage a personal brand. Excited to talk to this group of, I guess this is a demand generation summit. It's a little different than groups that I typically speak to. I mostly create content for a very niche group of people, which is SDR managers at SaaS companies that use a sales engagement platform for cold outbound. So, different than my typical audience, but I thought it'd be kind of cool because it gives me a chance to talk about kind of a personal brand. My my normal group that I present to does not really care as much about building a personal brand or leveraging it for building pipeline. And so I'm excited to talk to an audience that might be a little more interested in that. So let's jump into it. Agenda first. Wow, lots of very intimidating agenda. Glance over it if you want. We will go through it together here. So, as far as like leveraging a personal brand, I was thinking about the different ways that I leverage it. And leveraging a personal brand is actually pretty simple. And we'll talk about some specific strategies for that. But at the end of the day, like you need to get a personal brand first. That's kind of the hard part. And so, whether you want to leverage it for yourself or you are going to create personal brands within your company, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you would do that. So, number one is, and by the way, I'm not a marketing expert. I'm very good at the sub component of marketing, which is making a personal brand. So, I'm going to give my unfiltered opinion on it. So, it's easier to build a personal brand than a company brand. This is my logo. This is my logo type. So for my personal brand, I have this huge benefit where my logo is my face. And at the end of the day, if you want to be people buy from people that they know, people that they like, and people that they trust. It is much easier to program in likability, knowability, and trustability. I'm making some of those words up. It's much easier to program those into a face than it is a company logo. People just trust people when a face is attached to some real person with a real reputation, and it's just more likable and trustable. So you have a little bit of an advantage just out of the gate compared to company brands. So you can build trust and influence very, very fast. It's also easier for personal brands to use long-term strategies. I think I heard somewhere that CMOs on average last like 18 months. And so if you want to last as a CMO at a new company, you are going to want to optimize for the short term, maybe orienting to the quarter, which is cool because there are a lot of really great strategies to orient to the quarter. But since companies tend to orient themselves to the quarter, there's a lot of opportunity. There are a lot of things that are just kind of left not done because people aren't personally incentivized to go after them. Like if you are focusing purely on strategies that take 2 years to bake, like you're going to get fired. But if you're building a personal brand, like you know that you'll still have your personal brand in 2 years, and you can focus more on strategies that maybe take a couple of years to come to fruition. So companies optimize for the short term, and people managing their own brands don't have those incentives. And so there are a lot more opportunities to do things. And I'm going to talk about specifically the big one. It's like the only thing that matters in building a following, which for like the metrics in a company, it doesn't really show up in metrics at any company. And so it's like systematically ignored by companies, but you can figure out a way to do this one thing that I'll talk about a little bit later as a person very easily. It's a hard to measure thing that makes a big difference. So let's talk about it right now. The only thing that matters in building a following. I'm going to take you through the funnel that you need to take people through to build a following. So number one is people need to view your article. Some percentage of those people that an article or a post or a webinar or something. That's the top of the funnel. People need to actually implement it. There is often a very huge gulf between what you talk about and if you even talk about something that's actionable. And then if you do, how easy have you made it for them to implement? And then if they implement it, have they implemented it right? And then if they implement it right, are they going to see results from that implementation? Okay. So how far people get through this funnel is much more important than how many people see your stuff. So, for example, if I do a post that get 50,000 views, like if I do a LinkedIn post, I'll get tens of thousands of views every single time. If I do a post that gets 50,000 views and one person sees it, they implement something, they implement it right, and they see positive results. This is going to be by far most valuable outcome of that post. Way, 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 way more valuable than the 50,000 impressions. This is like, there are a lot of things that go into a brand, but somebody actually installing it, installing something you talk about right, and seeing positive results, just, how do you even say it? It's like, it just, nothing else holds a candle to that. It's like the golden snitch for those of you who are familiar with Quidditch. I'm only vaguely familiar with Quidditch. Basically, the only thing I know is that if you catch the golden snitch, it's game over. There are like some other ways that people are like earning points and stuff, but if you can like get really good at catching golden snitches, nothing else matters. Okay. So I'll trade 50,000 impressions on something that someone thinks is kind of cool for one person who's implemented my stuff and seen positive results every time. Because at the end of the day, building a following is kind of like the George Bailey strategy. You've done something for a, someone has seen positive results from implementing your stuff. They end up being a loyal fan forever. And at the end of the day, you're pretty much just like collecting these types of people. And over time, that can become a very big number. If a few people every day end up implementing your stuff and seeing positive results. So everything that I do is oriented to that goal. There's like short-term content, there's things that get attention, all that stuff is great to the extent that it drives people to usually some kind of longer form content where they can actually install what I talk about and see positive results themselves. So 10 true fans, stealing my own thunder here. So how many true fans do you need to be life-changing? If you're in marketing, maybe you've heard of Kevin Kelly's a famous article that says if you can get 1,000 true fans, you can make a living off those fans. Then Mark Andreessen, he came in and said, I would make an argument that if you have strong enough fans, you can make a living off 100 true fans. And then I came in to an audience of basically whoever's showing up to this. I would argue that you need 10 true fans, depending on your niche. Like if you're at a SaaS company and you're selling software, there's a very good chance that in your B2B professional niche, if you can get 10 people that are willing to pay a lot of money for your consulting, you can pretty much make a living on your fans with like 10. And you can go very, very niche. Like you can go niche enough to where this is just really valuable for just 10 people and make a living. B2B is a totally different ballgame for building brands and influencers, whatever you want to call it, content creators, whatever you want to call them. So, and unsolicited consulting requests are a big deal for a couple things. Like, and maybe you say, hey, you know what? I want to leave my job and I want to do consulting instead. Even if you love your job, knowing that you will be financially fine or better off if you leave your job is very freeing. And it can actually allow you to take a lot more risk. Like if you know that there's no financial downside to getting fired, then it really frees you up. Here's another thing that's different between big companies and individual people in this situation is at a big company, there is, if something has a 1 or 2% chance of getting you fired, you are not going to do that thing. That is not smart to do. But there are a lot of things that have maybe a 1 or 2% chance of getting you fired that will make you stand out completely from everybody else in the space. But nobody does them because it's not a rational career decision. So if you can get in this scenario yourself where getting fired is maybe financially net positive for you, you can all of a sudden start taking these risks and doing things that no one else is willing to do. And it can just like shoot your career into the stratosphere very, very quickly. So It's very freeing. How to have the best content in the world. So having the best content in the world is really not all that hard. Everyone is the best in the world at something. Maybe it's something very, very niche, but you just need to keep going more and more niche until you find it. So the best niche content is a strategy that you have been successful with personally. And it's a subject that's niche enough that you have the best content that exists. So my first article was literally explaining how I did this thing where I would spend like $500 to go to a trade show and get a floor pass. And I would walk up to VPs of sales and generate pipeline that way. We sell to sales leaders. And so it was like this kind of weird way. If you're selling a sales product, you can find a way to get funding, get budget to go to a trade show. You can go and sell to people at the booths. Like the most niche content in the world. But it was a smashing hit because this was like something for the small group of people this was relevant to. It was like this smashing hit. And now that we live in this world of LinkedIn, even if it's, I mean, only relevant to like, I don't know, a few thousand people in the entire world, that's a pretty big group of people. And you can have like extremely targeted content that people really like. So it's hyper niche, first article ever. And it spread like wildfire across people it was relevant to. So find your niche. Just figure out what topic you can write the best content in the world about. You can always find something that's the best in the world. You just need to keep going a little more niche until you find it. And you figure out what it is as a persona. Like my current niche is like, okay, like I was kind of this rare combination. I did really well as an SDR and then an SDR leader. I know how my company, Outreach, uses their own tool really well, and they used it to do really well in outbound growth. And so it's like this really small niche. I'm like the one person that kind of fits all of these characteristics, and I can have a content tilt. I don't even know if that's the right word. I've heard it before from a marketer. I have this like unique content perspective that no one else has, and people really like. Okay, so expanding. Here's what's crazy. As I talked about how like, yeah, maybe there are a few thousand people who would be interested in my booth hustling article. Your niche is probably a lot bigger than you think. For me, most of my content is about outbound SDR management, SDR leadership, using a sales engagement platform when you are at a fast growing SaaS company. That sounds like a pretty small niche. But again, we live in a very small world. So like in like 3 years, now I have 50,000 followers and I've stayed pretty tightly to my niche. It's just things spread much easier. So you can really dominate in a very small niche. All right, cool. So how to leverage personal brands. So make sure you have a personal brand, which maybe is going to take a couple of years to bake out. Like if you're focusing on people actually implementing your stuff, like a few at a time, it takes a while for that to come to fruition. But once you have a brand, or you hire someone else with a brand, or you partner with someone who has a brand for your content, there are a few things that you can do to use that to drive pipeline. Number one is you have the person with the brand invite people. It's like a little bit ago, someone was talking to me about like, okay, like we've got these influencers lined up. How can we use these influencers to promote our event? And it's like, well, there's some things you can do. Nothing's going to be more useful than just having them speak and having them tell their audience that they speak. So everything's been done on the front end. It's going to be very hard to find something that's more useful than that. Like if they're a person who has thousands of people who have experience implementing their stuff and seeing positive results, pretty much all they need to do is notify their networks. Also, like if they are well known, they'll boost responses on any relevant list where kind of their people will live. So you really just kind of need to make them part of it, and they'll drive people to it. Next is find a scalable way for the person with the brand to intro attendees who are decision makers to SDRs. Wow, that was long and complicated. I'm going to just explain the example of this. Okay. So I did a webinar and it was super popular. Anytime I do something about outbound SDR management, those are always my most popular things because that's kind of like the center of the Death Star of my niche. So I do one, and we had, I don't know how many people we had sign up. I think we had like 700 or something like that. So since it was targeted toward leaders, we just went through and found all of the people who were leaders who were not currently customers. And since all of those were figured out, it was very simple for me to just reach out to those people, those managers or decision makers that had attended, and then just introduce them to the SDR associated with that account. That was a project, assuming that the list is already like figured out for me. Making the list can take some time, at least for me, because I'm not an expert in making those types of lists. Once that list is there, though, introducing the SDRs, if you have something like outreach, takes, I don't know, like a few minutes and has a crazy response rate. Like if someone has shown up to your thing and learned from you, I think we had a 63% reply rate, generated tons and tons of pipeline just by reaching out to the most important types of those leads the right way. And so if you do invite somebody to do some kind of virtual event or in-person event and they drive people to it, make sure that you're identifying the decision makers that showed up that are not customers. And if possible, have that person introduce them to the SDR. You can drive a lot of pipeline really fast doing that. And I don't know if a ton of people are doing it. It's a weird thing where it's like kind of an obvious idea and it works really well, but it's like maybe the workflows aren't, people don't know enough about the workflows to do it. I'm not sure. All I know is that it definitely works. So highly recommend if you are going to do some kind of influencer marketing or leveraging your own brand or someone else's brand that is important to your target audience. Invest if you can find a way for them to introduce your prospects to the SDRs, it can pay off big time. Cool. Well, there we go. There you have it. Go get it. Feel free to ping me on LinkedIn if you want. I also do a newsletter. I'm like 5 newsletters deep, samnelsoncontent.com. And you can see kind of firsthand kind of what my stuff looks like for my audience. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. A big yellow and blue thank you. Have a great rest of your day.